Welcome to episode 13 of the Courageous Coach podcast, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on what it really takes to be courageous with your clients, your business, and your life. I'm your host, Melissa Haigh, and in this episode, I'm joined by Donna Ward-Higgs. Some of you may remember Donna from season 1. We had such a rich conversation that I had to invite her back for season 2. In this episode, Donna and I delve into the theme of courage in supervision. We explore the complexities of supervision dynamics, the importance of vulnerability, and the power of empathy and compassion in the supervisory relationship. Our conversation highlights the challenges coaches face in group supervision settings, the need for self-reflection, and the significance of honouring the investment made in supervision. So, are you ready? Let's dive in. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Courageous Coach podcast. It's lovely to have you all here listening today. And welcome to my guest, Donna Ward-Higgs, who many of you may remember from season 1. We did an episode together, which was fun. It was a really good episode. So if you don't remember Donna, this is the first time you've met her or heard her voice, then go back, listen to season 1 and our episode together, because it was a good one. But I've invited Donna back. So welcome, Donna.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back.
Lovely. It's lovely to have you here. And and you might be wondering, well, why have I asked Donna back? Well, aside from the fact that she's a fabulous human being, I wanted to do an episode on courage in supervision and to have a conversation about that with someone who I've shared my thoughts and feelings with before, and she has with me. And I thought, you know what? It would make a lovely conversation. So Donna and I are going to explore courage in supervision. What does that mean? What does it look like? How does it help us? What happens when we're not courageous in supervision? Who knows? I'm saying that like we've got an agenda. I've got no idea where this conversation is going to go. So let's wait and see. So what I should say up front is that Donna and I are both supervisors and coaches, and we undertake regular supervision, right? It is a critical part of our practice. We were talking about that.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just kind of want to lay that out there from the get-go so you know the pages or the page that we are on before we start this conversation. All right. So what I'm going to start with, Donna, I think, is when I said to you, come back and have a conversation. I want to talk about courage in supervision. What came up for you?
First thought, resounding yes. I think this is such an important topic in that even now, all of these decades into coaching practice, into having supervision, I still feel the fear sometimes. I immediately what came to mind was my last supervision session, and a moment at which I joked with my supervisor, like I had that moment of fear that you judge me for saying that out loud. So I'm really excited that you are bringing this topic to the podcast. I think it's something that your listeners will be really keen to hear those thoughts on, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for connection in this conversation. Just recognizing we're not on our own. Those thoughts we have, those feelings that we have, the experiences that we have are common and fertile ground for learning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think there is something, there's something so important about normalizing a lot of this stuff, isn't there? Right? Because we sometimes, well, I know I do anyway. I sometimes think it's just me. I'm not the only one, right? Who goes to say something in supervision and thinks, oh no, I better not say that. Or, drives to supervision, because I do my group supervision face to face and thinks, oh, I could take that today. Could I? Or maybe I'll take something else. And then, of course, gets really curious about, what's that about then? Why do I not want to take that? Or why am I telling myself that the other thing's much more important and I should take that? So yeah, really interesting. We all do it, right? We're all in the same, coming from the same perspective.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the sneakiest things about fear, the way it isolates us.
Mm. Mm.
That feeling of it's just me.
Yeah.
I'm on my own.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that kind of leads me quite nicely into something I'm really curious about, because I do, as a coach, I do a group supervision and one-to-one supervision.
Me
Because
too.
they give me different things. Do you find that, right?
Yep.
It's different things. And there's a real kind of paradox for me, which is that in group supervision, I really love the kind of wisdom of the group, the kind of normalizing sense, and looking around the room and the things that people bring and thinking, these are coaches, people just like me, struggling with the same things. There's a real comfort in that. And as you say, it helps with that. I'm not alone. I'm not isolated. But also at the exact same time, there's this kind of looking around the room and going, oh my gosh, they're all really experienced. They've all been doing this for a long time, or they asked a really clever question, or, they always bring much more meaningful stuff than I do, or,
That lovely sneaky comparisonitis.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really rife in group supervision. And yet there's also this thing about really wanting to be in that group and feeling valued and getting a sense of that normalization from the group as well. That's so curious, both things, right?
So I wonder if some of that is there's beauty in learning from each other. And I think that's the thing for me that I really take away from a group supervision space, that we're doing our learning together with and from. And as coaches, we want to help, we want to support.
Yeah.
But that want, that desire to add value, to do good work, I think shows up in the supervision space, parallel process, right? In the same way as it shows up in our coaching relationships. That moment of, who am I in this space in relation to these other people? And just in setting out that stall in that way, we're inviting those questions of who we are, who the others are around us, and how we make sense of our place within the group. I think I think all of those questions offer us a really beautiful opportunity for curiosity and our own self-reflection. So we've got it going on at layers.
Yeah.
Right? There's what goes on in the group and in the supervision and with the others. There's what goes on for ourselves in that moment and what we choose to do or not do with that. Like, the onion is peeled in many different ways when it comes to supervision.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that leans into this idea of the kind of complexity of supervision, in as much as there is so much going on in the room, right? There's even bringing in your relationship with the supervisor, right? The person in the room who's hi, I'm the supervisor, right? What's that relation? What's in between the two of you, plus what's happening in the group, and what's happening in the wider context as well. And if you're bringing client work, what's happening in your client work? There's such complexity in supervision, isn't there? And I think that's the work of the supervisor, right? To hold and work with that complexity. But I think sometimes for me as the supervisee, as the person in the group, not so much in one-to-one, but in group, sometimes I find that complexity quite overwhelming. There's kind of a lot going on. It's almost like, when you kind of go into sensory overload, it's just like there's so much going on. It's buzzing, I'm going, it's buzzing around me.
And we have to make choices.
Yeah.
Sorry, I stopped your flow
No,
there. Finish that
no,
buzzing.
I was thinking about buzzing, right? And thinking, and you're right about what's my choice here. And it's reminding me as well about how do we, in group supervision, how do we get the balance for ourselves as coaches between I'm here for me and my development, right? And all of those good things, but I'm also here in the group and impacting on the group and the group dynamic and having so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, and choices, as you say, choices to be made in the moment, right?
So it really reminds me of how important it is for us to connect to ourselves, as we do any and all of this, so that we can make the best choices for us in those moments. A lot of supervision's an investment.
Yeah, for sure.
Time, money, energy. And so I suppose one of the questions that I've kind of taught myself to ask in preparation for going into a supervision session is to think about what I need that return on investment to be for me. Because I'm the only one I can control.
Yes.
So whatever shows up in the group, whatever that brings for me and however I choose to react or respond to that, I still want to come away knowing that that's helped me to grow or to learn in some way. And I think the preparation we do before supervision, I think the reflection we do after supervision is as important as the time we spend in supervision. And they require different levels of courage, right?
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, say more.
So in our preparation, are we showing up honestly with ourselves? Are we choosing to go into the depth and the breadth of whatever we're experiencing, or what layer are we choosing to enter into that on? When we're in the moment, those choices that we make of what we say, what we don't say, the thoughts that we censor through the filter. And afterwards, there have definitely been times where I've done my supervision and gone, right, supervision is done, I'm on to the next task, job. I haven't honoured the investment if I'm doing
I
that.
like that. Honoring the investment. That's nice. That's a really powerful way of looking at it, right? Not because interestingly, when you say the word investment, right, I know for me, maybe some listeners as well, right, there's this kind of like, so you mean, it cost me X amount and I want to make sure that I got good value for money. That's what I hear when I hear the word investment. But when you say honor that investment, no, that's different somehow, right? That's not about the financial is important, right? But that's something different. Honoring the investment I'm thinking in myself. I've just spent a day or half a day or an hour, whatever it is with my supervisor. How do I honor my investment of me? And
Right.
my time and my heart and myself.
And my vulnerability, everything that I've laid out on the table in that interaction. To do that in itself is at one level. But to actually come away and do something with the product of that time and that energy that you've invested, that's taking it to another level, I think, where we honour our investment. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm really curious about this because you said, about courage, that courage shows up in all sorts of ways and in supervision, just as it does in coaching, of course. And I was thinking about this kind of, what shows up for us when we choose to be courageous, when we choose courage over comfort, right? And we know vulnerability shows up. And I am often, or have been, at my most vulnerable in supervision, but I've also been at my most, what we would call armored, right? My most self-protected, right? So it's almost like the extremes for me in
Yes.
supervision, for sure. And then also, we mentioned comparison earlier on. And there's something for me about where you see your supervisor, and if you're in group, your fellow coaches, where do you see them in your arena moment where you're choosing to be courageous, right? Are they in the critics section, right? Or maybe they're in they're the ones you've given them power, right? They're holding power over you, or you've given them power maybe. Or are they in your support section where we've got empathy and compassion? And now, of course, dear listener, you are now going, well, of course they're in the support section. That's where they should be, right? Yeah, 100%. But are they? Are they? Right? So there's something for me about where do we put, and maybe we might just talk about the supervisor for a moment. What about power? How does that show up in supervision?
And so having complete, it was one of my biggest questions going into and working through my own supervisor training, because I know some of those things that I found tricky early in my coaching days. A useful comparison was to think about what I take to a formal supervision with a supervisor versus what I might talk to another coach about.
Okay.
I think in Holland they call it intervision when you do peer to peer.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful way of labeling. And I know for myself, there were times where some of that more delicate stuff, or that felt delicate for me, more vulnerable, I'd be more comfortable talking about with a friend who's a coach than taking to formal supervision. So it was an interesting one to reflect on. And I'm conscious I might be going off at a tangent here rather than answering your question, but I think I'm linked. The word supervision often gets used in line management relationships. And I think that colours the lens through which I saw the process, which links back to power, right? Is this person sitting in a hierarchical position to me? We know that generally supervisors are more experienced, more time under their belt. They've got an extra level of qualification. We go to them because we see something in their practice or their philosophy or their experience that we want to learn from. As I say all that, I recognise how in that language, it puts that person on a pedestal.
Yep.
In comparison to, let me talk to my mate Melissa, who's also a coach, and we can just go, oh my God, this happened and I can't believe it. And I felt so stupid. So there's something in the language we use around supervision, the words we use to describe it, and how that colours our lens. I think I also recognise as I'm playing back that journey that there's something in my own coaching maturity in terms of that engagement with supervision, and recognising that supervision isn't a space in which our practice is judged or corrected. It's a space for development and nurturing and learning and growth. I think when you see it that way, the way you show up is different. But I think it takes a while to get comfortable, competent, confident in our own practice and who we are as coaches to be able to open up about that with somebody else.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I absolutely agree. The language isn't helpful, right? It really isn't. Or certainly in the UK, as you say, supervisor has a different kind of meaning. But then also when you speak to therapists or in healthcare, they're very familiar with this idea of supervision in a different way, right? So it's a curious thing. Maybe it's not everyone that struggles with the language, maybe, but for me, definitely, it immediately creates that hierarchical sense. And I think also mine was compounded, or that sense of power was compounded for me because my very first supervisor was also the gentleman who trained me as a coach.
Same for me. My first supervisor was the person that put me through my first coaching qualification. This is often the case. They're our touch point.
Yeah, totally. And therefore, they know more than me. They've been doing it longer than me. And I think in those early stages of my coach development, I therefore gave him the label of expert. And experts have power in my world, right? And what I think is really interesting is that I suspect now, looking back, if I asked him, he would have said, "No, I'm not the expert. That's not my role here. I know some stuff, but I'm not the expert." But it was the label I gave him, and I think this is such an important thing. This isn't necessarily about how well it can be, but in my example, it's not how the supervisor shows up. It's how we feel about them and how we feel and think about them, and then how that leads us to behave with them, right?
Yes, but it's co-created.
Mm.
And actually, this is something that feels really, really important in terms of establishing the relationship with the supervisor. Can we openly and honestly discuss in that initial setup how we feel about supervision, how we're viewing this person that we've come to? Like, if I flip that to you for a second and ask you, when you set up a new supervision relationship as a supervisor,
Mm.
how do you utilize that care and concern, knowing all of the things you've thought about going into supervision, to support your supervisee with all of those thoughts and feelings about power?
Absolutely. It's such a good question, because I think that, and this, let me divert slightly and I'll come back to the question, because I think what that brings up for me is something that and this isn't a rule, and it's not, I know not everybody listening might agree with this, but when I select my supervisor, I want someone who is both an experienced coach and a practicing coach. And that's kind of everyone should have their own checklist, right?
Right.
These are the things I expect that I want from my supervisor. And everyone's going to be different. Mine, practicing coach, experienced coach. And I think the reason I say that is because what I know now is that the coach that I was when I first qualified and was working with that first supervisor is not the coach that I am now, right? And I'm not molded in his image. Does that make sense? Right? I
It
have become
does.
my own coach. So I actually think that kind of is how, therefore, I talk about how I supervise, right? You are your own coach. You and many of my supervisees are fairly new or novice coaches. That's the area I tend to specialize in. So this is not about me molding you. This is about you understanding who you are becoming and who you want to be as a coach, right? And I don't have the answer to that, because I'm not you, right? And I think that's a completely different mindset. Whereas if I had become a supervisor, I don't know, the same day I became a coach, I don't know why you would do that, but let's say that I did, I would still be in that, it's the right way to do this. And and my way is the right, and I would still be tussling with all of that expertise and being a knower thing that was my hard work. That was the hard work when I first started coaching, was letting go of all that. Well, I would have still been doing that, and then probably bringing it into my work as a supervisor. So, and the other thing I think that's been really important to me, and I both as a supervisor, but also in terms of what I take to supervision, is that one of the things that we talk about in we haven't mentioned shame yet, which I'm sure we'll get onto in terms of how shame shows up in supervision. But one of the things that I need in supervision or from my supervisor is empathy and compassion, right? And I think that I have had experiences where there was a misunderstanding about what empathy actually is from my supervisor, right? Not, and that's no one had no one had pointed it out to them. So it's, but I think because there's a lot of it becomes that kind of, my empathy is to say either, and this is an empathy miss, by the way, as you know, right? Either it's not as bad as you think it is, or don't worry, it's okay, it's not as bad as you think it is, or it's, well, that happens to me all of the time, so don't worry, it's not just you. Now, neither of those things are empathy, and both of them don't help me, right? So I think what is really important in supervision is that when you are struggling as the supervisee, whether that's with shame or comparison or whatever it is that you're struggling with, whatever the topic is you bring, that it's not met with it's not as bad as you think it is, or yeah, that happens to, and even like looking around the group, is that, everyone here knows what that's like. It's like, okay, that doesn't help me. It doesn't help me. What I want is empathy, which is, okay, wow, that sounds really hard. And I can see the impact it's having on you. What do you need from me? That's empathy, right?
Yeah.
Let me sit with you in the discomfort. Let's not rush towards the light and fix it. Let's just sit together and work out what you need. So I think, so coming back to your original question, which is kind of this, what's for me as a supervisor, I think there's two things. It's that kind of, you're becoming, and I'm here to support you to become not like me, but the coach that you're meant to be. And I'm here to offer you empathy and compassion. And I know what they mean and what they look
Yes.
like, right?
I love that, because as you're talking, what came to mind for me was two very distinct examples where I went into supervision thinking I had a really clear cut thing that I wanted my supervisor to help me work through, and I wanted to get to the end of it, and having talked about it and have new ways forward and new clarity and new insight and lots of mechanics and practicalities.
Yeah.
And on one occasion, the supervisor attempted to deliver that, and it had some usefulness,
Sure.
but I came away from that session feeling unfulfilled, like I was still holding the thing, the actual thing that I'd taken, which wasn't about the mechanics and the practicality and finding a way forward. The second example, and exactly the same, I'd gone in, right, this is the thing I need to talk about, this is what's on my mind, this is what I need an answer for, these are the problems that I'm experiencing. That supervisor in that moment was able to see the human underneath the facade of, let's make it about this practical thing. Let's make it about this one client issue that's taking up headspace. And she very cleverly prodded around why that was the thing I was bringing, what that was doing inside my body, how that was colouring my lens. And we didn't actually talk about the thing because we didn't need to talk about the thing.
Yes.
It was what I needed in me as a human.
Yeah, totally. And in coaching, we say, whenever I'm talking about, if you're goal setting or outcome setting or whatever whatever you do in your coaching, And I always say, look, the goal that they start with is never the goal that they end up
The
with.
thing is never the thing.
Never the thing. Absolutely. And that's true in supervision too, right? So the skill, and this is what's so interesting to me, I think, is this kind of, I think the light bulb for me in supervision, and it kind of, it came a good few years into my coaching journey. It wasn't an early light bulb moment. And it was one of those light bulb moments, and I'm sure you've had these where you go, oh, it's a light bulb moment. And then you're like, but it was really obvious. Why hadn't I seen that before? Now I feel like a bit of a wally because I've never seen it before, right? But it was definitely a light bulb moment where and it was a supervisor at the time in group supervision who unlocked it for me, was this realization that really everything that I was struggling with in supervision or was bringing to supervision was an absolute reflection of what I was struggling with as a coach in my coaching practice, right? So that whole thing about parallel process. So I know that the whole worrying about what if I say the wrong thing, or that I don't appear, and I'm going to use the word clever, right? I don't appear clever enough in supervision is absolutely parallel to me in coaching, or it was. I've done a lot of work on it. But, that whole kind of, am I good enough? Am I clever enough? Have I earned my right to be here? All of that stuff. It doesn't just show up in supervision. That's in the room when you coach too, right? And that was such a light bulb and changed what I then worked on in supervision, because it became, as you say, less about the technicality and the practicality and more about, well, how the heck do I unravel all this then? Because I need to, right? Yeah. I have a really curious question, because
Go for it.
you were saying about, the things that you bring, the things that we choose to bring to supervision. And I said earlier on, my group supervision's face to face, and I get in the car and, and I think, what's today? What's the hot topic? What's really been bugging me? And I, although I've done reflections up to that point, I'm very rarely, it's in the car on the journey there that I'm really digging into what's today, what's showing up for me, because that's really all I can bring, not something that happened 2 months ago, But what I'm really curious about for us and coaches in general really is what don't we take to supervision? Right? What might we be avoiding? And of course, why? So I'm curious, what's your sense of what don't you take to supervision, or now or in the past?
It's such a good question, because if we're asking ourselves that, if we're able to reflect at that level, there's a wealth of data about shame and guilt and all of those things that are going on, right? And I think it changes. I think it's whenever I have that moment of, oh, I can't take that, or I'm not going to say that, it's always a signal to get curious for myself. I'm not ready to do that with somebody else. Okay, but that doesn't mean there's not anything there. The fact I'm not willing to do that with somebody else tells me that's something I've got to surface, at least for myself to start with. And I think it changes across the journey. I think very much in those early days as a practitioner, we do focus on the technicalities, the models, the right way, the contract, the managing the stakeholders. Like, we want to know we've got the process right.
Yeah.
And I think those are really important foundational building blocks as we establish and grow into who we are as coaching practitioners.
Yeah.
But I think certainly for myself, what I find I now take to supervision, and interestingly, I've changed supervisors 3 times in the last 12 months. I've gone to 3 different people for very distinct things that I knew I needed in those moments, and have felt less afraid of my own ingrained expectations of what supervision should be or should look like work with them for a period of time and get to know each other and build that relationship. One of my supervisors I worked with for 4 sessions, they were 4 of the most impactful sessions I've ever had. That period of time was really intense, and I knew I needed something very specific. And when something else presented, I knew I was ready to have the conversation to say, thank you for everything you've given me in this space. I'm being called in a different direction right now. And there's something else that's come to the fore that needs my attention. Like leaving that relationship open for the future, but knowing it's not where I need to be right now. So a lot of the stuff now is to do with me, how I'm showing up, what I've got going on, how I recognise my own lens showing up in those working relationships. So where those moments of, do I share it? No, I'm not ready. It's the most vulnerable pain points. It's the stuff that perhaps I've only just surfaced for myself, or that I know I've carried and recognise perhaps need to work through different modalities, whether that's, counselling, therapy, whether that's something else. But the shame still shows up. There are still those moments. And I know I've had a great supervision session when I come out having gone to places I didn't expect to go. Because that tells me I'm in the flow of the moment and the relationship and doing the work that's important. If I've got it all planned out, if I've got it scripted, if I've got A to B, I'm not showing up in that supervision space. I'm keeping myself safe. I am keeping myself armoured. I am presenting a version of myself that either I think I have to or that I think this person needs to see. And if I'm showing up in that way, I'm not honouring my investment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And I think it's really important that you said out loud, there's still shame, right? Because I think sometimes, you can, well, particularly when you do this kind of courage building work, you can kind of think, well, now I'm fixed. Now I don't, and it's like you still feel the shame, right? Or
We're human.
absolutely. And we can still be triggered. The challenge is to bring awareness around what triggers you, to be aware when it triggers you, and then to make choices about what you do in that moment. And I think it's such a lovely point that you raise around, I don't want to no, I don't want to take that. No. And then that curious question of, okay, well, I might not be ready to take it to someone else individually or in group. That doesn't mean I shouldn't pay attention to it. And that's absolutely about developing shame awareness and then eventually shame resilience, right? Because I think there's something, this whole question around what don't you take? And I had such a funny experience, and this was recently, right? So I've shared this before. You and I have been coaching a long time. I've been coaching for 10 years or more. This was a recent supervision session. So this is just to demonstrate that it still happens, right? Where driving, it's a quick one, driving along. Anyone who's listening, you're not seeing me on the steering wheel, so it's not working for you, and I'm sorry, but I'm in my car and I'm driving, all right? And I'm thinking to myself about a particular client challenge that I was having. And it was broadly based around giving advice and them wanting me to give them advice. Let's just say that, right? Now I know that that's a trigger for me, right? And I'm driving along and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I should take that client thing and that advice thing, and then the little voice in my head said, oh no, that's like the sort of thing that new coaches worry about, Melissa. That's not where you're at. You've been doing this a long time now. It should be more advanced than that. Think of something. I actually thought to myself, Think of something a bit deeper. Now that's super curious, right?
That little voice on the shoulder.
Absolutely. Now, the reality was that when we got into it, of course, there is absolutely something deeper there. And, but it was that thought of dismiss it because it's not complex enough. Not even, is it the right thing, the wrong thing? Will they judge me? Just, no, that's not complex enough for someone, who's been doing this a little while. You'll look like a fool in front of the group.
Oh.
I was like, hello, that's what the heck's going on there, right? And now it was something that I took it to the group. I was like, this is what I thought I wouldn't, but this is what I'm going to bring. And this is why I didn't want to bring it, right? So it's really interesting.
How did it feel in that moment, though, laying it bare?
Well, I think by the time I'd got there, because it's a good half an hour journey, by the time I got there, I'd kind of, I've got two voices, one on each shoulder, right? The other voice had gone, hello, pay attention, because the one on the other shoulder is talking a load of rubbish to you. So let's just pay attention here. So I'd kind of got to a better place by the time I got there. But I think what's really interesting, and maybe this is the difference as well, is that the group supervision that I'm in at the moment is firstly a fabulous supervisor, but a really great group. And nobody said, and I can't even imagine they would have done, but the little voice said, nobody said, don't be silly, or, oh no, I don't worry, I still worry about that stuff too. No one did any of that. They all just said, what do you need? What do you need from us? So immediately my shame, that little horrible piece of shame where I want to hide, is met with empathy, and suddenly shame, it dissipates, right? So of course, then the question comes, well, if it had been a different group or a new group, or there are lots of other variables that might have been at play, but this was a group I could do it with, right?
And I think that's a really important point in this conversation. Sometimes it's about being brave enough, courageous enough to recognise what works and what doesn't, and to walk away from a group that isn't providing those needs, or a supervisor where it isn't potentially gelling. I think sometimes because of the power dynamic in these relationships, and particularly if I think about myself as an early coach and going back to that training provider as a supervisor, I would have felt that I have to maintain that commitment that I've made, right? I've said to them, I'm going to work with you for 6 sessions or whatever it is, and I need to see that through because they know best, right? I'm obviously missing something. The thing I now know absolutely is to trust my own instincts about, is this working for me? Is it the right relationship? Is it the right group? And there's something to learn in all groups. I took part in a supervision group last year for some get my words out, put my teeth back in, a trainee supervisor. So somebody going through Tom Battay's training, I joined a supervision group to support this supervisor in their training. And there were definitely moments where I thought about how I'm showing up and who I'm showing up for, and in what way. There was still value to that experience, but I don't know that I fully immersed myself in taking my own supervision. I very much played on those sidelines of supporting others in the room and somebody in their training. Not to say I showed up incongruently or dishonestly or without integrity, but I was aware of how I was making use of that space, how I was showing up in that space. And I think that's an important point where our courage shows up, to know what we're investing, what we're taking from that investment, how we're utilising that space, and whether it's working or not, and not being afraid to walk away when it doesn't.
Absolutely. And there's courage in walking away when it's not working, because often we've built, if we've worked with them for some time, we've built a strong relationship, we like them maybe, all of that stuff. And we've signed up to this many sessions, or we've said we'll do this, and we don't want to let people down. But I think it's so important, because you know how we say in coaching, like, not everybody will be the right client for you. Not everybody will be the right coach for you. And we have to learn that that's not personal. That's
Absolutely.
the way. It's exactly the same with a supervisor, right?
Even more so.
Yeah.
I think in supervision.
Yeah.
And I draw on that example of having 3 different supervisors in 12 months. I knew well enough what I needed for me as a practitioner to feel confident to choose different stakeholders to provide facets of that. And to not be afraid in having that conversation to say, I know we've only had 4 sessions, and I honestly thought I'd be working with you throughout the next year. That was my plan. But I recognise in this moment, I've got everything I need from the sessions we've done together, and what I need now is different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think in group supervision, there's something as well about, it's not just the supervisor, it's the group, right? And sometimes the group isn't right for you. Now, I think there's a couple of things with that in my experience, because I started with one-to-one supervision and then moved to group, and I say now I do both. And I moved to group supervision for a very specific reason. I was telling myself a story that I'm not good in groups. No idea where that story came from. It's made up, but it's a story I tell myself. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to force myself here to be in groups, to, and so on. So I started doing group supervision. And it's very tempting to go, this isn't working for me because I don't gel with that person. I don't like that person, or that person's judging me, or, whatever it is. And actually and that may well be true, right? And it might well be the right decision to move away from that group. But you've also got to take that curiosity internally as well. What is it about that person that makes me feel judged? They're not judging me. I feel judged by that
This
person.
is my lens.
Yeah, absolutely. What's that about? That makes me, again, it's curiosity, right? That I'm curious about that. Now, that's not to say that you might still decide to leave the group, of course, but be curious about your part in that and owning your part in that as well, because that's rich data, right?
Absolutely. And coming back to shame and triggers, it's not a linear journey. So we can experience something that sits with us because the emotion is intense. We can work on that and reach a level of healing that feels good in that moment. Doesn't mean it's one and done.
Yeah.
Right? There are a number of times I can call to mind really easily where I thought, I thought I dealt with this one. Like that. And again, that shame narrative. Come on now. What do you mean you're showing your head again? I've done the work on this.
Yeah.
Yes, to a certain level for the point I was at with it then. I've moved on. Experience has moved on. And the fact it's showing up again tells me there's still something to explore. There's a new face to this. There's another dimension. I'm perhaps now more ready to delve into that at a deeper level. Because again, we know that shared love of Brené and her quotes, right? You can only meet anybody else at the level at which you've met yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
And that will change through life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And I think that's why, over time, working with new supervisors, different one-to-one group, whatever, it is really important. And I think one of the things I was very conscious of, as the last time I changed actually from one supervisor to another, is that it's so important not to end up in an echo chamber, and I felt that lack of stretch, because I was kind of going through the motions, every month or every other month it was.
Yeah.
Going through the motions. I mean, I'm saying the same things. I'm bringing the same things. Other people are bringing the same things. I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, and it's really only confirming what I already know. And for me, where I'm at in my journey is I don't want supervision to confirm what I already know. I want it to show me what I might not know yet. Right.
That really resonates.
Yeah.
That really resonates. I remember working with a wonderful supervisor who is still a really good friend. We stay in touch and support each other quite regularly. But I remember we'd worked together over the course of about 8-9 months, and I'd felt stretched. I'd felt we were exploring new topics. It was surfacing new thinking. And then our final couple of sessions, I remember coming away thinking, well, that was lovely because they gave me lots of reassurance and we're on the same page. They've made me feel really good about myself. But I don't know anything new to before I started the conversation. And that for me is is this doing what I need it to? Because if it doesn't challenge me, if it doesn't stretch me, if it's not getting me to think about things I haven't already considered,
Yeah,
it's not doing what I need it to.
absolutely. 100%.
I think supervision should allow us to feel courage coursing through our veins, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and therefore with that vulnerability and all that shows
Yes.
up with that, right?
Yes.
But to be in that space where that's okay, right? And I think that your point, and I come back to it because I think it's such an important point with anything really when we're talking about courageous coaching, but it's so true in supervision, is that it is always a choice what you bring, how deep you want to go, but allow yourself to be stretched, to be on the edge of it, to be able to practice being with that discomfort, because you're absolutely going to be in that discomfort with your clients. So supervision is actually a really great place to practice being with that discomfort, right? So that you can begin to stretch and practice that then with your clients. It's a double bubble, you get both.
It's why it's non-negotiable. It's the only space that can actually be created for you to explore that in that way. I feel like that made no sense whatsoever. Exactly what you're talking about. We will feel discomfort in moments with our clients. That's a given. If you are not, are you coaching? Have you fallen into a different space of just being a trusted advisor, advice giver?
Yeah.
I don't know. That discomfort should be inevitable. Will be, not should, will be inevitable.
Yeah.
And supervision is non-negotiable because it's the space where we own that's going to happen, and it's our training arena for it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. So I think in kind of drawing this to a close, because we might have to do a part 2. I don't know. I have a feeling that every conversation we have, I'm going to be saying, I have to get you back, right?
I would talk to you all day long, Melissa. You know this.
But I think the thing I'm curious about now, almost really for the benefit of listeners, because I think there's a question nagging in my head, which is, you and I have talked about the importance of choosing your supervisor according to what you need or the point that you're at, and I think largely when we choose supervisors, I mean certainly mine, well, first of all it was my original coach trainer, then it was a recommendation, and then it was another recommendation, right? That it almost like, I'm not going to say luck, but serendipity, right? The referrals came at the right point for me. There is an element of luck to that. Well, we could argue that point, but anyway. But what I'm wondering about is, what would you share? Because you've obviously been very deliberate about how you haven't just kind of got a list and close your eyes, lick your finger and found one on a list.
Well, actually, So listening to you talk about your journey, so I've been very deliberate in this last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
I was quite deliberate at the start in that I didn't really know what my options were. And so training provider was obvious.
Yeah.
There is a really big chunk in the middle where I simply, when being a member of a professional body, quite often you'll get emails from other members going through their own accreditation or qualification process, looking for support. And so I have gone blind into working with supervisors in training and being willing to be their supervisor and utilize that space. I've done a bit of, do you know what? Let's jump into this wholeheartedly, blindfolded, not knowing what I'm getting or how this is going to work out.
Okay. And do you think doing that has kind of enabled you to really shape what you want from supervision, what you're looking for in supervision? Has that helped you now when you said you've
Yes,
been deliberate? So has that then informed how you've then gone about selecting your last few supervisors?
absolutely. But I'm never say never. There is something really, for me anyway, and maybe it tells you more about my personality than anything else. There is something about diving into that unknown and cultivating that relationship that again mirrors what we do in the coaching process, right? We might have a discovery call, but we do not know this human that's been drawn to us to work with us in this way. It's a process of discovery. And I think there's something quite real and alive about doing the same in supervision, at least once, if not consistently. I think testing your vulnerability, courageousness, how you're going to use that space with somebody that you are absolutely building the relationship from scratch with is really valuable.
Yeah, because it is a mirror, right? For sure. Again, back to that coaching relationship, and I think that also links in then to our earlier point around you have to also therefore have the courage to say this isn't working for me and move on, because what you don't want to do is feel like you're stuck with this person
No,
because you've agreed to a 6-session program or whatever it is, and they're not the right supervisor for you. So there's courage in you have to, if you're going to do it in that way, let's explore, let's find what works for me, and my lovely mum always says to me, well, she said it to me when I was a child, she says it less now, but when I was a child she used to say to me, you have to try it 3 times before you decide you don't like it.
okay.
Anything, any hobby, you know what it's like when you're a kid. I want to learn to play the flute. I want to play football. I want to play the piano. Whatever it is, my mum would always say to me, yes, we'll get you lessons, but you've got to do at least 3 before you decide you don't like it. And it's become a bit of a adult, like grown up mantra for me as well. So hey, again, maybe that's my stuff and nobody else's, but give the relationship some time to develop.
Yes,
And also be prepared to give feedback to the supervisor. So,
absolutely.
and when they ask, what's working, what isn't working, what would you like more of, what would you like less of? Don't just go, it's great, thanks. Brilliant. You're brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
It really makes me laugh because we ask for feedback from our clients. And I've heard this brought to group supervision. They're telling me everything's great. And then something surfaces on the final feedback form, or they don't attend the next session. And get yourself in the position of being on the other side of that. Supervision is such a beautiful space to test the water and all those things that are going to show up in your coaching work.
Definitely.
Utilize it.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to end on that point because that is it. There you go. If that's a drop the mic moment. So thank you, Donna. As always, I've loved our conversation. I knew when I wanted to have okay, I've got a topic and I just want to kind of free flow around it, that you were my girl, right? So I appreciate you coming along, and with very little preparation other than I'd like to talk about courage and supervision, you've just run with it with me. So I really appreciate
how we roll, right? We are simply just recording the conversations that we have for your lovely listeners. And I love every minute of it. please invite me back next time as well.
Yes. Maybe if you are listening and you love listening to Donna and I, you could start a petition or something like more conversations with Donna. But no, I really appreciate you, Donna. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Coach podcast. I hope it gave you something to reflect on, something to feel, and maybe even something to act on. If you've been nodding along or feeling that tug of recognition, you're not alone. These conversations are here to remind us that courage isn't about having it all figured out. It's about showing up, doing the inner work, and being willing to be seen, even when it feels uncomfortable. If that sounds like the kind of coaching journey you want to go deeper into, I'd love to invite you to check out the Courageous Coach program. It's designed especially for qualified coaches in the early years of building their independent practice. Those who want to coach with more courage, clarity, and humanity, and grow a business that truly reflects who they are. You'll find all the details over on my website, and I've popped the link in the show notes to make it easy for you. And if we're not already connected, come and find me on LinkedIn. Whether you've got questions about the program, want to share what's resonated for you in this episode, or you just fancy a chat. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know another coach who might need a little courage boost, pass it on. Courage is contagious, after all. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and keep choosing courage.